All right, the next announcement is too big for me to make. It takes the man himself, John Carmack. Give him a big round of applause.
Okay, so those of you that have been here before know how this goes. I'll usually talk until my voice gives out, take questions for another hour or two, and then get pigeonholed out in the hall for another couple hours. So about a couple months ago, we wound up having a pretty surprise announcement where I showed up at the Worldwide Developers Conference with Apple and demoed some of our technology at Steve Jobs' Keynote. And a lot of people, since this wasn't really announced much ahead of time, nobody knew what we were doing, comes out and it's like, what is this outdoor racing stuff? This is kind of peculiar. It looks pretty neat, but why are they doing it at Macworld or a Worldwide Developers Conference? And where are all the guns and everything that we normally expect from id? So what we've got here is a little bit more of a sense of what you'll actually see in the game. We did decide at both the tech demos that we did at E3 and the WWDC thing that we were going to show what was really new and different for us at id Software. Because everybody knows that we're going to do a good job at the run and gun sort of action type stuff. I mean, that's what we do, that's our heritage. We'll continue to improve and do a good job at that. But we are branching out in some gameplay in different areas. We have some driving elements, we have some adventure elements in here. So we put together a little video that we think gives a little bit of the flavor of what we're doing with the game.
Forgotten man, but I have to tell you, you have a long road ahead of you. So that is the name. Rage is the game that we've been working on internally, and there's quite a story behind all of this. And to go through it, when we go back to right after we finished Doom 3, I went off and started working on next generation technology, trying to figure out where we're going, looking at the new consoles, where we want to be on the PCs, all this type of stuff. The rest of the team, or a large chunk of them, was helping Vicarious Visions finish porting Doom 3 over to the Xbox. Then the team pulled over and we started working on what we thought our next game was going to be. And it wasn't Rage. Initially, after Doom, we knew we were going to do something new. We were not going to follow up on Wolfenstein, Doom, Quake, the IPs and franchises that are still very successful and we're still continuing to pursue, but we knew that we wanted to internally step out and do something new. The initial game plan that we had, internally, the code name for it was Darkness. Obviously, somebody else has already picked up that name now, which highlights a separate issue in the industry. But it was a dark, scary survival horror sort of thing set on an island with creepy magic and monsters. And we spent a year on this, working along, doing some neat stuff. There were some pretty cool things that were built for it, some cool monsters and interesting areas. But it just really didn't seem to be hitting everything right for us. So we made the really tough decision, and it's a decision that I know most video game developers don't really have the luxury of doing, but as id Software, in our position, we were able to sit back and say, I just don't think this is going in the really winning direction. And we tossed around a lot of different ideas, and There's always been, among a lot of people, the love for the sort of post-apocalyptic Road Warriors Fallout sort of genre on there. And we're just tossing around what would people like to do, and the idea of driving around, like running over people in pickup trucks and ATVs. And this seems like an interesting set of action, as well as all the normal bashing things and shooting rockets and building things up and hopping up the cars. All of this seemed like something that we could do interesting things with. And Tim Willits, of course, is the real lead on the design of the development of the game story and the gameplay and all that. But we wanted something that could play into the strengths of what we're doing with the new technology, and just maybe it was time for id to not do something that was too dark. We get hit with that on almost every game where the game is too dark. You look at this, so we've got a lot of bright, sunny outdoor areas where we can show really cool things that people can actually see without turning up the monitor and brightness settings on everything. There's so much stuff going on now, and Todd touched on a lot of it as we were going through this, and it's going to be hard to just try and get out all the important things that we're thinking about and planning and working on here. And I'm going to try and schedule and see if I can do the rough overview so the people whose eyes start glazing over at all the technical stuff can filter out maybe a half hour or something, and the hardcore people can stay and listen to this for as long as they care to. But so at the highest level, we've got Rage, the internal project that we're doing, built on id Tech 5, which is our new generation of technology. We have our partnerships going on with Wolfenstein and Enemy Territory, all the mobile work, which I do really think has been a great success story, where you heard me talking last year about kind of what we were doing with the mobile, what I thought the goals were, and what I hoped things to kind of come out of this. And we've gone into it. We went in complete newcomer. We'd never done any of this, and we're a pretty big success there. We're making profit on all the titles there. They've earned out. They're selling great. We'll probably be near 2 million plus units by the end of the year across the mobile titles. It's doing real well. We're critically acclaimed, lots of awards, and I'm hearing good things from the people that have sat down and played these titles. But I also mentioned last year that I have a specific strategy that we're attempting to pursue here, and that's this bottom-up migration of new content, new titles, new IP, where the traditional way of doing things is you have like some smash movie or some other big title, you bring out this high-end AAA content, hopefully across multiple console platforms and the PC, and then you start slowly chopping the game down. You make a version for some kind of low-end or handhelds, and eventually get your way down to the mobile platform at the very bottom, where it's usually done by some brand new team and generally people nobody knew what to do with over there. And it's this degrading process, actually. If you take something that you loved and that was great and then you cut it down, if you're doing a good job, you re-envision it, you reimagine what it should be within the limitations. But all too often, you wind up just getting things that are kind of pale shadows of something that was great originally and gets less great with each move that you make on it. And there's also the sense that, everybody knows that the game industry now is risk averse, and it's for darn good reasons. We know how much it's costing us to build Rage. It's tens of millions of dollars to build a top-notch game going across multiple platforms. And people will complain that, oh, why can't the game companies be more innovative? Why don't they try more radical ideas? It's all well and good to say that when it's not your $20 million that it's going to take to develop that game. So, we are going pretty far out on a limb with Rage. It's not the id formula for success of, run and gun with just fast action, great graphics, run through this with a simple, straightforward game on that. So we certainly have our little bits of maybe sleepless nights about hoping that, boy, this is not Wolfenstein, Doom, or Quake. I sure hope it's a success when it's going to take us 4 years of development eventually to get through all of this. And that's a big risk, and that's a lot, and you can't expect all game companies and all publishers to be willing to do that all the time. But coming from the other end, when we look at the mobile titles, when it costs us maybe $500,000 to try a new development title on the mobile, like we've done with Orcs and Elves, where we built up a new play style, we've got a new environment, new characters, new themes, things that we can play through there, you can look at that and say, there may be a couple million people that wind up playing a mobile game. They know it's a mobile game. They're not expecting it to look like Rage does. But if they pick it up and they have fun with it, the key thing is you wind up having a good experience. You say, I liked that game. I liked Orcs and Elves. And then when you have the opportunity to take it up to a higher level, you've got a base, a large chunk of people that have already played it, enjoyed it, hopefully said good things about it to their friends. And then when you bring it up, as we've done to the DS, as sort of step one of this sneaky plan here, it's a very, very different process of, instead of porting down, porting up is wonderful. You get to take the game that you did the best job you could have on there, and you thought it was as good as we could make it within these limitations. And then you get to say we have, in this case, 6 times as much memory, a little bit faster processing speed. You can then go and put everything that didn't quite make it into the game that you thought would have been great, winds up making it into the game. You get to do more and more things. So the DS game was a ton of fun to do because it was great. We took a game that was already fun and we made it more fun in every possible way. And anybody that enjoyed the game on the cell phone will probably want to play the game again on the DS because everything that they liked is there and it's better. And this is so much nicer than the suffering that we would go through when we would make a 3DO version of Doom or something where it just got this painful crunching down of, oh, it's sort of there, but it's not really the right thing. And I hope that we can take this many steps further, where the obvious next thing is if Orcs and Elves DS goes out and it's a success, yeah, we'll probably wind up doing bringing Orcs and Elves 2, get that brought over to the DS, but then we can take a step up and do Orcs and Elves on the Wii, waving the magic wand around. We could do all sorts of great stuff with that. And then who knows, maybe after that it comes to an in-Tech 5 cross-platform across everything extravaganza. Obviously you redesign the game at different points there, but if you can build a brand at this lower risk area, you can afford to take more chances. And I could see us doing additional things like that, trying that out at the lower end on things that may wind up becoming our AAA top-notch titles years into the future. So, in particular, the DS version was a lot of fun for me to work on, and I did do sort of the core engine programming on it. Just looking at the demos as we play them up here, it's worth realizing and letting it sink in that the DS is almost exactly 1/1000th the power of like a high-end platform that we're running Rage on. 16 megs versus 16 gigs of storage on there. We are expecting to ship on 2 DVDs or 1 Blu-ray. It's a big, big game with lots of data, and it's about that same kind of relative ratio of processing power. A little less delta if you consider integer, a lot more if you consider floating point, but it's big. 3 orders of magnitude in almost any circumstances. That's difficult scope to even deal with, but it turned out to work out really wonderfully, where once or twice a year I do my working retreats where I basically go, it was actually right before QuakeCon last year I was doing one, where I usually take my dev system, lock myself into a hotel room and live on room service for a couple weeks and just do a whole lot of work. The last one that I did this year, I took the Nintendo DS dev kit and my normal development system. So I set it down in there, and I worked for 4 days on the DS and put together the core 3D engine for all of that. Then I put that aside and went right back to working on Rage. And it was amazingly seamless. It just turns out that the things that I do, the programming, my approach to problem solving, it really didn't matter much whether the scope was this 1,000-to-1 ratio across the development stuff. There were interesting problems to be solved in both cases. And in the particular case of the DS, it was fun because it is like a time warp stepping back in time. I mean, I've been doing this, it's 16 years old now. We do trace the games all the way back to Commander Keen on there. And I have a long history of all this work that I've done. And usually, I'm introspective enough and honest with myself enough that I can look at each program that I did and look back and say, that was pretty good, that was clever, and that was just stupid. The people that have looked through the original Doom source code, probably puzzled over what the heck is this polar line clipping stuff? Things that just made absolutely no sense because I didn't understand how to properly clip lines way back then. I lived through and to some degree did some coaching and prodding of the evolution of 3D accelerators on the PC space through here. So I was able to look back at how I built engines for early consoles and all the early stuff. So I was able to look at the DS stuff. I read through the tech manual a couple times and said, I know pretty much exactly what I need to do to go write this. And it literally took me like 4 days to put together the core of the 3D engine. Then I handed it over to Fountainhead to do the other 99.5% of the work that actually makes up the game. But I did get my, my little bit in there at the start. And that also ties in a little bit with, after the Worldwide Developers Conference, I was eating dinner with some of the Apple engineers, and we were talking about cell phones, cell phone acceleration architectures, and things like that. And I was complaining about how both NVIDIA and ATI, they did cell phone chips, first generation ones, and they each botched something different. And it was kind of frustrating to me that I was saying, can't they just have the guys that lived through that did those original chips, that knew the mistakes? Can't they just go back and write the chip, make the chip right this time? And the guy I was talking with said, yeah, they could, but most of those guys are too rich to care anymore. They went and they made it big on that, and there's no interest in going back and working on some small platform like that. And some people would probably think the same about my position on there, but it was actually a lot of fun to take this sort of retro coding bit where 90+% of my work is still on Rage, on this high-end, bleeding-edge, incredible resources stuff. But it was a lot of fun to go back and say, I have all these tools still in my toolbox that, and in fact, they're a lot better than they were 10 years ago when I might have used them the first time. And to kind of pull those out and put something together there was a lot of fun. So this whole migrating of things up and down platforms has a lot of different benefits. And to segue a little bit off that into cell phones on there, in many ways, we're very happy with how the mobile development's gone. We've got big successes. They're making money, titles that people are happy with. But I will say that I was a little bit disappointed in the case that was made to us when we started this was that cell phones turn over every 6 months. There's this extremely rapid pace of change, and we were expecting a little bit faster technical advancement than has happened on cell phones, where for the most part we've done 3 generations now with Doom RPG, Orcs and Elves, and Orcs and Elves 2, and they've had fairly close to the same requirements. And I think that there's been a significant improvements between each generation, especially between Doom RPG and Orcs and Elves, as the development team learns what they can do on here. So they get more creative, they do better things. We get a little bit more resources to go in there. But I do feel that at this point, after Orcs and Elves 2, we've more or less tapped out what we can reasonably expect to do on this basic hardware platform. So the next mobile title that we do, at least in this style of play, will probably step up a little bit on the minimum system requirements. And the mobile systems are interesting in that it's horribly fragmented. We produce 4 core versions when we do this. There's a low-end Java, high-end Java, low-end Brew, and high-end Brew. And then EA Mobile takes it and makes literally sometimes a couple hundred different customized versions for every single different phone handset, tests it on there, and there's all sorts of different issues there. On the one hand, a high-end cell phone should kick the crap out of a Nintendo DS because you have cell phones with insane amounts of power, but you're really hamstrung by the APIs that you work through, or Java is the worst thing. It's just a good way to make something a tenth as fast as it should be. Java has a lot of benefits. As a systems, as a language where you want to program in and do like server-side applications, I'm all for it. But Java on a resource-constrained embedded device, that decision never made much sense to me. The reason I think that it got sold into it, and this ties in with some other modern things, is that it was sold as a security architecture, I believe, on the cell phones, where people would say, if you want to be able to download content on here, we know we've got all these crazy different processors going on. We should have something that's interpreted to put things in the sandbox. And an argument can be made for that, although it's worth noting that Brew and Symbian with Nokia, they run essentially native code with trusted developers, and they don't have incredibly horrible problems. But modern cell phones, you wind up with, you've got MMUs on things, and you should have real security architectures. And in fact, I had a pretty serious argument with Steve Jobs after the WWDC about the iPhone. I don't know how many people actually paid attention to that WWDC, but the announcement at the end was that you can write web applications on your iPhone. I'm sitting in the front row going, boo, hiss, that's not an announcement. And and I grabbed him a little bit after that, and I was saying, okay, I understand there's reasons why you want to control the platform. Apple does a lot of things very, very well, and part of that comes from having control over a number of different areas. But I was just basically saying, put me on the side of people that would prefer an open environment. I can understand why you want to do it. And then Steve tried to make this argument about security, which I was totally not buying, that they require this, they can't be open because the security architecture and all this. And my point is that if you can't make a Unix-based computer, which essentially the iPhone is, secure, there are bigger problems than owned cell phones that you have to deal with there. And I mean, we don't know where all this is going to go. And continuing this sort of random walk of topics, we do have a lot of Apple fans sort of growing up at id. The whole Mac development thing or WWC thing came about almost randomly, where Robert Duffy had said, "Hey, I want to bring Rage up on the Mac." I'm like, "That's a good idea. We learn something every time we port to a different platform." It has made money, every single Mac title that we've shipped. It's not huge money, but every one of them has been profitable. So we more or less assumed that we would do a Mac version, and might as well do it earlier rather than later. But once he started on it, then Apple said, "Hey, can we do this for the Keynote?" And we were looking at that thinking, well, we're planning to do it for E3, which was a month later. But there's a long way to go with getting it from the point where we had it sort of functioning on there, running into all sorts of driver issues. But we did wind up crunching ahead on that, and it turned out to be a worthwhile thing just to get the team together on that. But we have a bunch of people that have picked up the iPhones, and I really wanted to possibly do something on the iPhone. Not so much that I think any of our current games would work directly over to there, because the important thing that we've done is build the game around the device, and the iPhone's a different device than what we currently have, so it might not fit directly into any of our current plans, but it's a neat device that certainly I'm looking forward to having people work on. And one of the things that I say to people is I've been threatening to get a smartphone, something like the iPhone, because I don't know how many of you saw the rocket ships over there, but I've been really wanting to set up a smartphone so I can go ahead and fly the rocket over Wi-Fi from my phone, because opening up your phone and dialing your rocket ship was just a pretty damn cool idea. So the other Apple-related thing that ties into one of these other topics is that Todd mentioned the Quake Zero initiative, where this is a project that I kind of pushed as a good way for us to grow a second team from an early kernel, because we've got this fundamental problem. We decided finally that we want to build a second team at id, and we've held off on this for a long time, largely because of my personal belief that there was a strong value to having a small focused team at id, not having to worry about who's on the A team and who's on the B team and all the office politics and things that will devolve out of that, and just the scope of the company. But enough things have changed in the industry and the time that it takes to develop the projects and all these things that we finally made the tough decision that we do want to build a second team internally, so that we don't want to rely on the formula that we've had has worked well, where we develop a core game and then we work with partners to explore our other games in future iterations. And we're going to continue to do that, but we have decided that we're going to bring a second team internally at id. Now, even at id, we can't just snap our fingers and say 25 of the best developers in the world, drop what you're doing, come to our door and start working on a new project. So there's the difficulty of how you grow and scale a team into that. So we've seeded the team with a few of our current core developers, and we've begun hiring. We've brought in a few new people to start staffing this team, and we're eventually going to grow this to the point where we'll have a full team of 20, 30 people, and the intention is to build an id Tech 5 based state-of-the-art brand new Quake Arena title that will be all the bells and whistles, high-tech, be all, do all, be awesome. But it's going to take a while to bring that number of people up. So what we want to do in the meantime is take this idea of take the Quake Arena game, the assets, chop it up, repackage it, do a little bit of spiffing up, but not a whole lot. We're not intending to try and make it a modern game, but make it a free web game anybody can play. and see what we can do with sponsorship and advertiser-supported development on here. It may work, it may not. I think that there's at least the possibility that we could see millions of people going and trying this out and playing it, because as was mentioned, there's a lot of people that still play Quake 3 today, 8 years after it was released. And you don't see it so much now, but the early QuakeCons, when you'd see people playing competitively, of course they had the graphics turned down to mush. They were like, anything that'll give me a fraction of an FPS more. So the visuals were not the key thing. There was core gameplay goodness there, and I think that's still as true as it ever was. So the ability to take something at this stage where it's an old game, but it pretty much is guaranteed that it'll run at 60 hertz on everybody's computer, it'll run well because it was the major benchmark for years afterwards. We can expect that somebody can click on this, get a quick download, get it up and start playing, have a really good experience, and connect into this broader world, doing the things that we can for community building, sponsoring tournaments, all this type of stuff. There's a possibility that that could turn out to be something great. I hold out this little hope that this could turn out to be, maybe even bigger than what we're planning to do eventually with the large conventional game development stuff. And honestly, a lot of people know this, but Quake Arena was always my favorite game and my favorite id game. It wasn't our most successful game, it wasn't our biggest blockbuster, but it was successful enough, and everybody has the genre or style that suits them best, and I have always liked the simple, straightforward, kind of pure and elegant game. And I do think that there's a lot nowadays where you're expected to have everything and the kitchen sink. Games have to be huge and baroque. And we'll do that as necessary on our top-of-the-line titles, and that's why Tim leads the design side of things. I won't go in there and just say, oh, we need to make the game simpler and simpler, because that's not necessarily what all of you want. But at least for me, on my side of things, I do jump in for a quick game of that. And there was actually a short period of time, during our development, when I was the best Quake 3 player at the company. It didn't last very long, and I remember the first QuakeCon when I was here, I was kicking everyone's ass. It didn't last to the next year, though. So that aspect of the game, I'm still looking forward to going back and revisiting some of that. And we are planning on also working with Apple on making sure that the Quake Zero stuff will run on the Mac. And I've got a little bit of a special project that I should preface this, and a lot of what I'm saying here, since id Software is not a public company, I can come up here and say all sorts of things about unsigned contracts and things that we may be doing with other companies that are not guaranteed. So a lot of the things that I'm saying here are not guaranteed to be happening. But there are at least things that are seriously under discussion and consideration that we're trying to do. So one of the things that I want to do with the Quake Zero framework is set it up on the Apple platform, get the Apple engineers there, and they have an almost unique ability because they own everything in their chain of things, from the mouse through the device drivers, the firmware on the chips. They can go through all of this, and what I want to do is actually get oscilloscopes out and say, where is all the latency going from a twiddle of the mouse wheel or a click of the mouse button to the time phosphors change on the CRT or the LCD on there? And this is something that it's on the one hand that sounds incredibly geeky on there, but snappy, crisp responsiveness is often what the difference is between a game that feels really right and something that might look great but just doesn't quite have the feel that you want there. And there's a lot that you can chase sort of at the software level, but sometimes it's not completely obvious exactly where all the time goes. And while Apple now has great hardware, in many cases it's better than the PC hardware. If you're looking at x86 versus x86, we've seen very, very competitive results from the CPU-wise. They're still never really going to win gaming benchmark stuff on there, just because so much effort goes into the PC video drivers. A lot of it's cheating that I don't even really approve of. If not cheating, at least engineering directed in ways that I don't think are particularly productive. So I don't hold it against Apple, but of course they would always love to be able to actually win on some benchmark like that, but it's still not really likely to happen for reasonably good reasons. But I am pitching this highly responsive gaming as an area where Apple is almost uniquely positioned to do this, and it could actually matter. If we took a game like Quake 3, if you play it on a standard graphics driver device system, you're going to have at least one frame of latency, potentially more, depending on how things are set up. And a lot of times there's latency that people don't even know about. You know, you have buffers in your firmware coming from the mouse, then in the operating system, then in the application queue. And the application generates video draw calls, which goes into an API buffer, which is eventually read by a hardware buffer, which eventually gets scanned out one frame later by the CRT or LCD on there. And all of this hasn't really been kind of scientifically and analytically looked at and quantified to see what we can do with that. So that's something that I'm looking forward to sitting down and just seeing if we can nail down where we can make this better. Because especially with an older game like Quake Arena there, where we don't have to worry about running a frame behind, getting 100% utilization on the GPU, because the GPUs can run it 10 times faster than it needs to on there. So we can concentrate on trying to make it the absolute most responsive experience possible. And given that it's a competitive game, that people do care about this ultra low level twitch response on there. I think that it's actually a healthy thing for us and the industry in general to start looking at in different ways. Because I started touching on this a little bit last year, but I can kind of see the lessening in relevance of the massive improvements in graphics fidelity. And as a graphics geek programmer, there's a temptation to sort of rail against that and say, oh, but we'll do better and better things, and we'll keep being able to make the next big difference on there. And there's still differences to be made for sure. But whether it's necessarily the most important thing or even the lowest hanging fruit is a little bit more open to debate. Where there may be more things like this where going and knocking 5 or 10 milliseconds of latency or some degree of scatter in latency or something like that may help the gameplay feel more fun than the next little layer of eye candy on top of things. And that also tied into one of the decisions that was interesting with Rage is that we started off, especially in the previous project, what we called Darkness on there. It was not intended to be a 60 hertz game. It was 30 hertz. We were trying to do much more general purpose graphics. We were going to have more possibilities and options and so on in there. And I had written a really nice kind of framework with this general parameter setting stuff where you could go and set parameters on the world, override it by the view, override it by the entity, by the surface, by the material, by the program. And it was, a very flexible sort of system. And we had material editors where you could get up and drag things around, and it was kind of neat, but I was looking at all of this and saying, I'm not seeing the big grand win out of this. I'm not seeing the thing that makes this twice as good or 4 times as good as what we were doing before. And once we made the decision to kind of go over to more vehicle side things and making the kind of racing and car action a major part of the game, we were able to set up some tests and run the game at 60 hertz and 30 hertz. And we decided that the gameplay quality experience is just much more important to run it at a smoother frame rate there. So it's kind of nice once we made that kind of hard decision and said, okay, we're a 60 hertz game. Lots of things. At 30 hertz with modern graphics hardware, you feel you can do almost anything. There's this temptation that if any designer or artist comes up and says, can we do this? A graphics programmer will go, sure, we'll write this 5-page long fragment program and we can do fabulous stuff like this. But at 60 hertz, especially when you've got fixed amounts at the front for the back for post-processing and screen space effects, you're left with a lot less decision freedoms. And it's kind of nice to be able to just say, no, we can't do that, not reasonable for 60 hertz, and we get to make that decision a lot. But the 60 hertz decision is also kind of interesting from a technology licensing standpoint because it gives anybody interested in the technology the option of either directly following what we're doing and redoing things inside the same performance framework, or they can go ahead and be a 30 hertz game and blow us out of the water visually in terms of what we did by just piling more of everything, more complex things on top of it. And the technical stuff is really pretty interesting on id Tech 5. I encourage those of you that are interested in it, Matt will be demonstrating some of our internal tools for everyone, for people that are interested in mod community and things like that, sometime tomorrow, and he'll just have the game up on stage showing you how we make the levels and how we wind up texturing the different areas there. And there's some pretty neat technology that we built up in there that's been a learning process. And in fact, it's You could look at, in many ways, enemy territory was sort of a beta test for what we were doing with the megatexture technology, where they have an earlier version of it there that you can cover the world with it. And I think enemy territory, I do think, is sort of the benchmark right now for a cool-looking outdoor game. I think it looks great. There's a lot of fabulous stuff in it, but the strategy for how we built things for enemy territory was we had a complex procedural generator that laid out the outside world, and then you have the ability to go back in and touch things up on the stamping. And our position at id, as we looked at all of that and looking at the experience there, was that we wanted to use less synthesis in the procedural part and have more ways for the artist to just be able to use more common tools to build exactly the data that they wanted, so that we could get the large-scale boulders and cliff faces and things combined with the paths and the roads, and then eventually with the little sketch on top detail there. And we think that's worked out really well for us. The other major difference is that enemy territory only virtualizes the core landscape. All of the characters and vehicles and buildings still use a conventional texture management system, and we are certainly still suffering with that as we move to the consoles and try and get things brought up and working on there. It's a matter of chopping things down, seeing what we can live with lower resolutions on, all that. With Rage and IdTech 5, everything is virtualized on there. It's been a couple years since an artist has asked me what resolution should I make something at. They just make everything as big as pretty much they want. And sometimes it's wasteful. You get things like every character face is a 2K by 2K texture or something, because the artist, they'll zoom in, leave the face on their monitor sitting there with lights cast on it. Yeah, it's really neat, but before we always would have had to go back and say, damn it, cut that in half or a quarter or something like this, because you're blowing the texture budget and so on. And that was always a painful process. Now, it's still not necessarily the most effective thing if they make it at 4 times the resolution, but it doesn't hurt us in any way. And that aspect of the technology, it's not immediately obvious. When you look at the stuff with Rage, and we can say, look at the detail here. Every rock, you could go carve your initials behind the rock there. You can go do anything, anywhere. You can see the benefits from a visual standpoint, that doing this lets you make everything like a matte painting. It can look like a movie set or something, because you can just stop the camera there, and then when you look at the way the tools work, you can totally imagine just going in and making it look as good as you want right there. And so that's definitely a big value, because there's still power and value to awing someone, to cresting over the hill and seeing the land laying before you, just looking more glorious than anything you've seen before. Now, there's still a real value to that, and we're certainly not giving up on the quest for graphical wow. But one of the aspects that is really probably at least as important is the effect on development, where conventionally when you're building a game, if you're smart and diligent about it, you'll try and rough out the gameplay, try and make it fun, and then you'll try and make it look good. Now, of course, it rarely actually works specifically like that, because usually level designers want to make things look cool while they're building it, and when you try and tell them to build with big orange blocks, it doesn't usually go over very well, and there's a lot more beautification that goes on earlier than it should. But still, the idea is that you build out the level, you make it fun, and then you go in and you make it look really cool. But what happens, what's always been the case with game development, is that you set it out, you're saying, okay, it's playing the way I want. Now, to make it look cool, then the artists go in there, they bring in tons more textures and models, and they go do all these other things. They wind up using different render programs that other things weren't using. There's weird interactions that come out, bugs crop up from just interactions of different things on there. And it's difficult, so it's not this disconnected process. What we've got now definitely isn't magic. It doesn't solve all of these things, because we still have to worry about, you can't throw in a 2 million triangle model and expect it to just behave the same. You can still throw in too much foliage and things like that. But within the limited context of working on surfaces, it does solve things. You can have an artist that can go in, they can do anything they want on the surface of the world, and it will have zero impact on the game's performance, the stability, there will be no other crashes, the resource footprint, the path that the game takes, any of those things. Within that limited domain, it just works. And this has a lot of benefits where you can take an artist and have them just point them at something and say, go make that beautiful. And if they're working within the Surface tools, you can expect that there's not going to be any impact on things. And the hope from this, and we haven't proven this out because 99% of all of the work on that was done by one guy, the space of a couple months. But we do have the ability to, we've demoed this where you can have multiple artists working inside the same world. You can start that up and have 5 guys go to 5 different valleys and start working on it. And the hope would be that it could become a little bit more like the Hollywood model where you have extensive creative work done in pre-production where you have your master artist that's setting the style for the game and building the sort of core pieces there. But at some point, you want to be able to greenlight the project and call in 100 set painters or 100 carpenters or something and get the work done. Because when you think about it, it's amazing how Hollywood can go and build some of these $100 million budget films in 6 months when they go into production. We are so worlds away from that in game development for completely logical reasons because of the pace of technology change. If our technology slows down to that pace, eventually we'll get there. But this is a possible end run around some of that where within this limited aspect, we do have that ability to let people work independently. And it's kind of neat at the office the way we've got this set up. All of these textures are stored on a central server, and they're enormous, where that map, enemy territory used 32K by 32K maps across the levels. That racetrack in Rage was 64K by 64K, but we have 2 wastelands that are 128,000 by 128,000, and that's... When it made the comment that that's like 10,000 monitors worth of data if you spread it all out. It's an enormous amount of data. So we store all of that on a central server. And what's cool about this is the artists can be modifying all of that, and we're fetching blocks from that as anybody's running around the world. So I've got, this last week, I was working on some little technical aspect of drawing the surfaces there, and I had this stubby little level that just had a cutout of the landscape that was used for the town at the start of that, the little trailer there. So the first day I'm working on my thing, it's just one flat texture across there, just a little sandstone texture. Later on in that day I open it up and all of a sudden everything in this courtyard looks amazingly cool. There's footprints and tire tracks and strewn out newspapers and scuff marks and leaves, and all of this just kind of happened. And I didn't even have to get anything new from source control, it just appeared around me. And then as I went through the next couple days, the coolness just kind of spread out down the streets from there. And it was really very much a validation of what I wanted to see from this technology. So I think that that's really going to be one of the important things coming out of this. And especially if this type of thing becomes widely adopted, you can imagine especially the big companies like Activision or EA where they've got a lot of studios, you can probably take a few dozen people that become specialist surface artists. And again, I encourage you to look at the tools with Matt demoing tomorrow. You can't expect to drop somebody like a level designer from one game, drop them into another game and say, we're behind schedule, help us catch up. It's hard, it rarely works like that. But in this case, you really can take somebody that's a surface artist and they could probably go to a completely different style of game built on the same technology, and they just say, here's our palette of things that we build with, here's our style guide, just go forth and make this look really good. And I can totally see that happening with larger teams of artists and being able to more effectively utilize those resources across there. Now the tools on there is one of the most obvious things. We've been showing this off the past couple days to licensees and press people kind of behind closed doors. And we do like showing the terrain editing because it's one of the really neat things that you can do there. But it's a small part of this larger change that we've made at id, where we have a well-deserved reputation for doing good technology with very poor tool interfaces to it, because we've intentionally tried to remain a small company, and that usually meant when I or somebody else does a core piece of technology, we make the technology work, and then we have it controlled by text configuration files and console variables, because we really only have to educate 3 or 4 people that are actually working with us in the project on what they need to do cool stuff with this. And specifically, Epic's done a much better job of making nice, pretty tools that people want to use and getting out and helping out a lot more people. while specifically we don't intend to kind of address that side of do a lot of hand-holding and support and so on there, we've hired new people, dedicated tools programmer, dedicated support programmer, that make sure that we really have nice, pretty GUI tools that that work really well. And it is, the development goes the same way. All the landscape texturing stuff, I prototyped that out. Just in the game, I would hack in some little thing, so wherever the character was pointing, okay, now I'm going to do a stamp, now I'm going to do the tiling, just using the game mechanics and using console variables, because that's the way I develop things. So I went and did that and said, okay, the technology works, this is doing the right thing. And then Andrew, our tools programmer, went and made this glorious terrain editor that used the exact same primitives, but added all of these things so it looked the way artists and designers wanted it, so they could tumble the world around, scroll through these huge palettes, run through all of the undo, redo of the different things where the core technology was always there, but a lot of people, it wasn't accessible. And we've done this across essentially all of the elements of technology that we've got, where we've got the our animation editor, there's a materials editor, although that's somewhat deprecated for some reasons I'll probably get into later. But all these different pieces of tools and technology, sound editor, particle editor, these things, they're part of the game. In fact, when the game ships, you bring down the console, type id Studio, and the entire development environment pops up on top of everything. So it's still integrated with the game. It's how we're building the game, and everybody else has it available to them. So I know a lot of people, although it's interesting, when we've shown a lot of these people, especially at E3, when we were doing the technology demos, we've got all this great stuff, but the thing that a lot of people went, we'll probably have this set up someplace tomorrow, but we have the 4 systems, a PS3, a 360, a PC, and a Mac, all kind of running through this racetrack on Rage. And we're showing out, oh, this is all great, but so many people would gravitate down the line and be just like, it's running on the PS3. That was really one of the big notes that we saw from the people that were looking at the technology. And I mean, I know I always get quoted saying things about the PS3. I know I said some things last year that people picked up on and tried to beat me over the head with on here. And none of my core opinions have really changed about it. The PS3 and the 360 are far closer than any 2 gaming platforms have ever been before, so it's not like this is really horrible, but there's no doubt that when you have a problem moving over, it's going to be the PS3. That's just the way it is. I mean, right now we've got, one of the core things we did, we hired a new guy that's one of the best PS3 guys around. He was instrumental in some of Sony's new acceleration architectures, and we've got great people. We were growing talent internally, but we went out and hired specifically great PS3 guy. So we're putting every best possible effort into this, and it's going to be every bit as good. There's no doubt. It's not like when Rage is released, the PS3 version is going to be any worse than the 360 version. I mean, it could possibly even wind up with slightly better in some regard, but it's going to have taken more effort to get it there, and there's no doubt about that. I mean, just from the simple things, like on the 360, you've got 512 megs of unified memory, and Microsoft reserves 32 megs of it. On the PS3, you've got 256 of video and 256 of main, and Sony takes 96 of it. That's a huge difference from a developer standpoint. And again, enemy territory, we're suffering through this quite a lot right now, where the PC version obviously is running pretty well. We're pretty happy with how all that's going. The 360 version is actually running great. I don't know if they're demoing it here, but it looks really good. We're very happy with that. The PS3 version is lagging quite a bit behind in terms of getting it up to the same quality of experience. And it puts us in one of these nasty positions where the business side of things really gets in the way, where as an engineer or somebody that appreciates the games, I would certainly want to say, well, if the PC version or the 360 version is done, let's get them out. But we have to make those tough decisions about, well, simultaneous releases have a lot of really important aspects to them. If you're going to do marketing, you really want to market for all of the titles. And specifically, there's things like, if you don't simultaneous release and you don't add anything, Sony won't get behind you for a later PS3 release on it. So there's issues with that, and we're dealing with them as best we can for enemy territory. But within Tech 5, the fact that the same code, the same data, you just compile it and you get it running on all the platforms. What that allows us to do is, again, there's no magic. It's not like any technology platform just lets you build whatever the hell you want and have it show up on all these platforms. It doesn't work like that. But having it at least be convenient and built in to deploy on all the platforms lets us take it up, build the game, check it out and say, whoops, it stopped running on the PS3, and then you get to go ahead and fix it then. Where there's a big difference between saying, okay, what we did last night pushed us over or broke us on the PS3 versus getting it over to the PS3, saying, hey, it's running great on the 360, and then, oh my God, it's 80 megs over on the PS3. We're going to have to redesign, cut a level or redesign something completely. So there's a really big difference in what we get out of the kind of development strategy there. And I know one of the things that's going to be a little bit unfortunate about this the combination of the cross-platform strategy and the decision to go 60 hertz, super fluid, high speed on there, is that we have less upward scalability than we've previously had, where the standard with the exception of Quake Arena, which was a little bit of an outlier for us, where we did concentrate on high speed a little more than usual, but most of the id titles, as we've gone through Doom Quake, Quake 2, and up through Doom 3, is we always targeted them to come out and play at around 30 hertz on a good system, and chugging around a little bit lower on kind of more common systems, with the hope that, with the expectation that it gives people a reason to go out and buy the brand new video card, to go ahead and get the speed, double the speed, crank the resolution up, all of these things. And it was, well, obviously it's worked well for us over the years. And I've always had a vested interest in trying to stay in touch and involved with the evolution of the 3D acceleration hardware in the PC space. Now with the current multi-platform focus, it changes things a little bit there because we're intending it to run 60 hertz on a 360 or a PS3, which are essentially previous generation PC hardware. Now it's true that when you have a fixed function console, you can generally get twice as much performance out of that as you would on a PC going through. When you're not targeting a specific thing, when you've got a whole broad range of things you're supporting and you have to go through different APIs, you can expect kind of a doubling in performance there. But by the time we ship Rage, PCs are going to be a couple generations beyond this. And graphically, in a lot of cases, the game as it's designed to be played will be almost idling on a state-of-the-art blazing, fire-breathing video card of whenever we ship this. You can always crank up resolution. I mean, you'll probably be running it at 3 megapixel resolution or something by then. And there will be a few things that I will likely be able to do on the PC to add higher quality texture sampling, shadow sampling, crank up a few of these things. But it probably won't have quite as much of a delta as we're used to on there. But on the other hand, it means that the people that, I know there's a bunch of people even here that have probably been a little bit out of step with id releases, where when we come out, your video card, it will probably happen with enemy territory some, you're a little bit behind the curve and it's not quite running the way you would like it to on there. It's a little bit less likely to happen with Rage, but I do feel a little sad that we won't necessarily be the primary driver of the step into next generation video on there. Tying in with, so there's a lot of things like that where I'm making this conscious decision that going for the absolute lushest graphics isn't necessarily the smartest thing for us as a company to do. Where I could certainly enjoy the challenge of saying, okay, let's go in and let's do whatever visual style, let's do completely awesome graphics on this, but the idea is to make this wonderful game. And the graphics are an aspect of the game. The performance of it, frame rate wise, is an aspect of the game. What we do in terms of services, gameplay style, and all of this are other aspects. And we're making a lot of these different decisions. It is nice that we have so many more projects going on now that we can explore kind of different areas of the solution space. While we do hope that we have a bunch of neat ideas for Quake Arena, InTech 5 things, with all the build up your avatar in lots of different ways, totally cool, flashy stuff on there. But the Quake Zero stuff using ancient, outdated technology is still going to be a lot of fun to build. And you know, I talked about the worry that when you have two teams that there'll be an A team and a B team, and people will just worry about which team they're on and what their hierarchy in the company is and all that. But the truth is, there were, you know, a bunch of people that were like, I really want to go work on that project. So I think we can kind of keep a parity like that, and even working just on this outdated stuff, it's going to be fun for now, and it's setting the stage, leading us into, you know, the next huge monster thing on there. And I do kind of hope that I eventually hope that we're hitting pretty much every platform with id titles here, where the DS was neat to get on. Like I said, I hope we can do a Wii game with Orcs and Elves. I think there's a great fit there, since id Tech 5 is not, it's not portable down to the Wii. It wasn't really on my radar when we were laying out the technical decisions, and it is a pretty good delta down there. So you couldn't really do the same content running across all of that. A lot of the technology could be ported over fine and could work really well for that. But like, we're not going to see Rage on the Wii. But I'd be happy to see some other stuff on there, because one of the comments that I've made year after year here is that while graphics and everything are great, I think the really important things that are going to happen in gaming in the future all deal with I/O devices. And while the little wand moving it around with the Wii, it's clearly not the end-all be-all of interfaces, but the fact is, it's been this little spark of newness that's brought Nintendo great success, and I'm really happy for them with that. Where id and Nintendo have never been really good corporate fits. You know, from really early on, we had some projects and we didn't get along in general. Surprisingly enough, I really do like working with Microsoft on a lot of the things. I think they do an excellent job with the developer support on there. Like the Sony guys have this lousy position where you're talking to an American guy that may know exactly what you're saying and the problems, but they have to forward everything back over to Japan. And we were talking about some technical docs where Intel and NVIDIA may produce docs for that. They get translated into Japanese, go over to Japan, they digest them, write a manual, they get translated back to English to go ahead and give to developers over here. And there's, you know, all the expected lost in translation things there. But the work with the DS has gone along well. I mean, I suppose to the largest degree EA buffers us from Nintendo on there. I wouldn't be surprised if we wind up maybe looking at PSP games. That was something that I think a year ago I might have been more excited about doing a PSP game than a DS game, but the DS sort of flowed right into the Orcs and Elves side of things and turned out to be a lot of fun. In fact, it was so much fun that one of the projects that, again, here I am talking out of turn without a business contract on here, but I really think that we're going to wind up doing a Quake Arena themed game on the DS, because there's some specific things about it that I like, that I think have some good synergy there. I really like the push that Nintendo made for the fact that it's Wi-Fi, you can play on the internet, we would certainly support that, but the ability to send games to people without sharing cartridges, I think is that was a courageous move on their part, actually, because historically all of the handhelds where you were going to play multiplayer, you had to go ahead and have 2 cartridges, and to allow people to, I'm sure that was hard on the marketing business people to say, we're going to let people play the game that didn't buy the game, but I think it was still a really good thing. And you can scale the game content where you give them a fun game that they can play like that, but still give them a reason once you've hooked them. And if it's a good game, you're going to hook them to go out and actually buy the game to be able to play the whole thing on there. But it's interesting on that, where I think it's going to take what I look at as almost a courageous design decision to not be very 6 Degree of Freedom in the game action. And there's a DS game out, Metroid Hunters, that is kind of neat. You look at it and you use the touch screen with your thumb to scroll around, and it looks just like mouse look. And the first time I looked at that, I'm like, that's totally cool. That I could totally see playing a game like that. But it's one of those things that doesn't hold up, because you play around, you do a demo, it looks awesome, but you can't play it for a half hour or an hour. You know, your thumb just doesn't hold up to that type of motion like that. And it's the type of thing that you don't have a ton of these people that sit around and play that for 5 hours straight, like people will play Quake 3 here. So my early inclination on this is to build a game that is definitely Quake Arena theme in terms of the arenas, probably the characters and some of the things that we're doing like that, but leave it more or less Doom 2 style of deathmatch with the 2.5D, because playing the game with D-pad, shoulder buttons, and 4 buttons is really a great way of doing things. We've done a number of the niche consoles, way back to the Atari Jaguar and so on, that played the game like that and were a lot of fun. And I think if we take 60 hertz gameplay on the DS with this 2.5D shoulder button, limited vertical motion with auto aiming there, I think it's the type of thing that you could sit down and play for hours, and you could really care about your performance, and you could be caring about, again, the micro latency, having the feedback be so tightly tied where you get the competitive players that will sit there and absolutely care about every frame that the buttons are on, and making that a very binary sort of action there. I think we can make a pretty interesting game there. So that's probably the next DS title to be expected here. We've talked with publishers about it, but we haven't signed any contracts or anything there, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to make that one happen, and I'll have some degree of involvement on that, on the initial laying out the technology, setting it up, making sure that the networking's working right, and then handing it off to another team to make sure that we can bring all the polish that we need to that game. So the rest of the platforms, where the cross-platform stuff at the high end, we're committed to for all the major games. Wolfenstein will also be cross-platform on that, although since it's not id Tech 5 based, it's going to have the same pain and suffering as we're going through with enemy territory, although at least we'll be better informed about how we need to kind of dedicate the resources there. And it's probably a misnomer even calling it id Tech 4 based on there, because Raven they've lived with the Doom 3 code base for so long, they've made it their own, they've made massive changes. The render probably has no relationship other than high-level architectural stuff to the original Doom stuff. So there's plenty of cool stuff going on in Wolfenstein, and it's really not my project. That's Kevin's baby. I mean, I go in and peek over his shoulder at Wolfenstein stuff every now and then, but I'm not the one to talk too much about it. And I know they're trying not to say too much about it, but you could probably pigeonhole some people and maybe get a little bit more insight. There's some neat stuff going on in it. It is a different type of game than either what we're doing or what Wolfenstein has been in the past, but that's generally a good thing. We're branching out into a lot of different areas. My personal inclination is towards these simpler games where you do see me probably getting, even a little bit more excited about some of the simple, fast things like Quake Arena on the DS or Quake Zero, than Enemy Territory. Honestly, I sit down and look at Enemy Territory, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. I haven't spent that much time playing a game like Enemy Territory to be able to jump in and just not get completely murdered. That was, again, I fall back to the simple games. I liked the straightforward deathmatch of Quake 3, fun, easy game. And then I liked the fact that we can iterate these smaller games faster. But again, 99%, or at least 90% of my time is spent on the high end, working on the id Tech 5 stuff. I wind up dedicating a few weekends a year going out, and then a few afternoons kind of doing project management stuff to these other projects. And it's nice to be able to have that kind of leverage where you go in and I can set a technical direction on there, which specifically in the case of the mobile phones, I do think the key thing that we did right on there, and it's proven out by its success and that it was a good decision, is we built the entire games around the interface, what the cell phone was. And that was the decision at the beginning that we were going to do that. Yeah, I wrote a little 3D engine for it, but the user interface decision and the style of gameplay was the core decision, and all the work went from there. Similar things like that, like being able to go in and kind of lay down a framework for how we should do the graphics on the DS version, or how we should probably wind up doing graphics and networking for a Quake Arena version. On the one hand, I sometimes hesitate to be put up here as a figurehead for whether it's id or any of these projects, because as time goes on, we've got more and more people here, and I'm a smaller and smaller part of everything that goes on. It's easy for me to say, okay, a ruined, dusty town and world, and I'll vaguely think of something up there, and I'll have an image, okay, ruined, dusty, post-apocalyptic town, but an artist will see in their head like what we had showing in that demo there. And that's really special. That allows them to then, if they're given the right tools, to be able to go in and make that happen. And we're getting closer and closer to being able to give them all of those tools. Now, I have a more distant vision here where the hope for InTech 6 is that we're going to be able to virtualize geometry in the same way that we virtualized all the surface texturing on here. That in addition to being able to paint on any surface, you can sculpt on any surface. That you will be able to then completely remove the addition of geometry from any of your resource management tasks. And there's interesting directions going on with the pace of highly multi-core CPUs, compute accelerators, GPU programming models, what's going on with PS4 or 720, and the different directions. And these are years in the future, but they're things that we need to start thinking about now, because we're going to go out and have Rage out, run a new Quake Arena out after that, and then we're going to be a new console cycle. And I'd like to be able to have a new generation of technology that can make another massive difference there that's ready, kind of on the ground, running earlier on. But we don't necessarily know how to do this yet. I mean, I have my personal pet ideas that I would like to try. And I'm very excited about NVIDIA's CUDA architecture with a more general programming model for GPUs. I'm probably going to prototype some of these pet ideas there. And if it works out well, if it gets to the point where Rage is more or less technically done sometime next year, and I can move off into more of a research role, that's what I want to be working on. So we got the 1 hour flash there, so I'm going to move into questions now, and we'll